days, and at his age, he had his big A4 notebook, and he sat in the meeting with us for 4 days, listening and taking notes. I mean, of course, at his age, at some point, he was dozing off, and then he woke up and remembered the stability of this continent depends on my shoulder. Let me keep myself awake. And then at the end of that dialogue, he came back to us and with his notebook and said, "This is what I had you guys say," and gave us feedback. And I think part of this exercise as well, we want to do that. We want to hear from you, and we want to hear each other as a collective. And hopefully, this efforts, a generation after us, even a generation that is not born yet, will be able to benefit from conversations like this as we really think about an Africa that contradicts our current reality. And yes, thank you so much for being here. You are officially welcome to the University of Pretoria. We don't bite. We like people. The Center for Human Rights, we like people, and we are happy to be your host. It's also very good to see old friends and colleagues that I haven't seen in a long time. My friends from Ghana CDD, friends from Kampala. My very first entry onto the African continent as a very young, ambitious girl. I took a flight and went and spent 8 months in Kampala doing all sorts of crazy things and eating good pineapple. So it's good to see my friend and colleague from Kampala. And of course, good to see our colleagues. My colleague and her colleagues are joining us from the Pan-African Parliament. Ms. Dominic, who really has been quite supportive to our work with the Pan-African Parliament Civil Society Forum. But it is not for me to do the welcoming where I come from. Usually the patriarch is the one that comes to say you can take off your shoes and be comfortable, but please do not take off your shoes. We don't want to have problems. And so I'm going to welcome the acting director of the Center for Human Rights, Professor Ebenezer, to come do the official welcome. Thank you, Prof.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure and honor to welcome you to the University of Pretoria for this very important meeting. We have very, very important, eminent people with us and will be with us for the rest of the week. As my colleague has said, it's going to be a very important meeting where we exchange ideas and thoughts about important issues relating to our region, to our continent in terms of democracy. Before I just proceed, I thought it would be important for me to give honor to whom honor is due by acknowledging some important people in our midst who will be participating with us throughout this meeting. I would like to acknowledge the presence of Ms. Caroline Gaita, the APMO chair. It's a pleasure to have you in our midst today. Sami Hobeng, APM Secretary General. It's also a pleasure to have you in our midst. Rashad Hali, PMG Executive Director. You're most welcome to our midst. And of course, we also have some other people, very important people here. The former Justice Minister of Namibia, that's a good friend and a long-time friend, and of course, an alumni of the center. She knows you're welcome, Ma. So we have to have you back. The APM working group, which also the CRH is involved, the PAP and COS forum, we also welcome you to this meeting. And then last but not least, I want to acknowledge the secretariat of the PAP. I know that you are here with us and you are welcome. If I don't mention names, it's only because I don't recognize it. But you are all welcome, and we're looking forward to a very robust, very interesting discussion for the next few days. We want to hear your thoughts, your thoughts, your own side of the story, and we are hoping that this discussion will also be very important for us in terms of how we move forward in our continent, in terms of realizing democracy, as the case may be. I don't want to take too much of your time, but just to thank for sparing your time for coming. To welcome very far, to so welcome near. to be with us today. We know that you are very busy, but despite your very busy schedules, you have really set aside your schedule to be here. It's not for want of not doing. So we really want to appreciate you for your time. Want to appreciate you for coming in and of course to engage, to discuss, to deliberate, in order to take our continent forward. So you are welcome all, and I want to wish you the very best during your deliberation, and of course all the best for all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Prof. I forgot to mistake. I didn't recognize my siblings from Kenya, in Nairobi. Anyone who knows me knows that Kenya, in fact, Nairobi is my number one favorite city in Africa. I'm not looking at the Ghanaians because I tell them the same story when I'm in Ghana.
Thank you very, very much to you and your team for opening your doors to partner with us to have this conversation. It's been almost 1 year of having conversations with Bonolo's unit, with a lot of intense planning and coordination. And we're not surprised at all that for a center that believes very much in democracy and civic engagement, you have taken on this responsibility by being our host for this conference. We don't take that for granted, and we are very, very grateful to you for this. But let me stand on the established existing protocols to once again welcome you all from the perspective of the Secretariat. It is important to note that the Africa PMO network, or the Africa Parliamentary Monitoring Organizations network, is a network of civil society parliamentary monitoring organizations that, like the name says, monitors the works of parliaments at their national, regional, and subnational levels, but also for organizations that engages parliaments. So we are not only into the work of monitoring parliaments, but also into the work of engagement. And that is why for this conference, it continues to run as the Parliamentary Engagement and Monitoring Organizations Conference, because often we've had parliaments draw back when they realize that those who are coming to engage are people who are supposed to be in the work of parliamentary monitoring. And parliaments do not like the monitoring bit too much. But of course, our work engages also parliaments, supporting parliaments to succeed. Not only do we call them out when they are not doing the right things, but we also find avenues and opportunities to work with them. Because when parliaments work better, when things get well, it becomes better for all of us. And so that's the mandate of organizations that are seated in this particular room. And we're happy that we could be able to get colleagues from 29 countries joining us for this week's conference. And I think that for us at the UPMON Secretariat, this is a very great achievement. This is the fifth in the series of UPMON conferences. In 2015, when the initiative of a network of parliamentary monitoring organizations was mooted, the Ghana Center for Democratic Development, CDD Ghana, convened a meeting in Accra to kick this off. This was essentially made up of a number of organizations from a few countries, on our continent. We're happy to note that some of the people who attended that pioneering meeting are still in the room, including the one who was leading that work at the CDD Ghana, Dr. Franklin Odro. And so we're happy to note that the history, the records of that still continues to remain. But then in the year 2020, there was another convening after COVID has hit, to be able to discuss where we are 5 years down the line. And this also happened in Accra as part of the work. But fast forward, the network tried to put itself together, and then we're privileged to meet in Nairobi in Kenya in 2023, hosted by the East African bloc of the network, then Kampala in 2024, and here we are in Pretoria 2025, this time being the biggest of the 5 conferences that we have organized. Because in the previous conferences, it was usually sub-regional conferences, either in West Africa or in East Africa. The intention for this one was supposed to now introduce it to Southern Africa, but the Southern African folks were magnanimous enough to say not only do we want to meet as Southern Africa, we want to have our brothers and sisters from all over the continent joining us. And so we have 29 colleagues from 29 countries joining us, and we're very proud that we could be able to coordinate this. And so just so that we know who and who is in the room, in no particular order, but just so that we know the countries that are represented. We have, of course, the host country, South Africa, who have graciously hosted us, having the biggest of delegations for this particular conference. Of course, we have folks from Zambia, Namibia, Mozambique, Malawi, Lesotho, Madagascar, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Ghana, Nigeria, Cote d'Ivoire, Guinea-Bissau, Togo, Benin, Senegal, Sierra Leone, the Gambia, Niger, Liberia, Kenya, Somalia, Uganda, Tanzania, South Sudan, Cameroon, Morocco, Ethiopia. And of course, we've been joined also by our friends who have been coordinating a similar network in the Latin American space. And so we have Maria Baron joining us from Argentina, and we're happy that they've been with us. We've continued to keep this relationship every step of the way. So on behalf of the Secretariat, I wish to thank very much the Center for partnering with us for this, but also the host organization, the Parliamentary Monitoring Group, PMG, who has done an amazing job in ensuring that we could put this work together. It's not easy putting this together, but they've been so supportive. The Southern African Council of Non-Governmental Organizations, SAFCNGO, have also been a reliable partner in this, as well as Mazalendo, who leads our work, the APMON work within the East African space, PN Africa, Parliamentary Network Africa, leading the work within the West African space, and also hosting the Secretariat. We're grateful that you made it. And for team members who, in one way or the other, may have had some few challenges at the airport, some few challenges on arriving at the hotel, some few logistical challenges. When you are moving well over 80 people from across 29 countries, some of these things are meant to happen. So please, on behalf of the Secretariat, you would like to forgive us. But of course, as we continue with this process, we learn along the way and we get better. Welcome you all, and we look forward to a very fruitful conversation. Thank you very much. Good morning.
Thank you, Kwame. It's good to know that almost half of the continent is represented here this morning, and also that this is happening in Pretoria. There's a saying in my language that "Moja morago ke kgosi." It really means the one who eats last is of royalty. So again, we are the Beyonce of this thing. It may have started in Accra, but we are the Beyonce of this thing. So I love it for us. And I'm going to welcome Rashad, the Executive Director of PMG, who really is our host here. And we want to extend a profound gratitude to you, Rashad, and your team for the extraordinary work that you do with our parliament here in South Africa, but also the work that your team did together with all of us to put this together. Welcome, Rashad.
Dumelang, Mokweni, Goeiemorgen, Bonjour, Allo, Salam. Distinguished guests, colleagues, and friends, it's a real honor to welcome you to this important gathering, and dare say an overdue gathering, a conversation under the theme, Back on Track, reviewing the dialogue between legislatures and civil society. This conference couldn't be more timely. Just yesterday, the world marked the International Day of Democracy, a day not just to celebrate our democratic ideals, but to confront the uncomfortable truths about where we may be falling short. And let's be honest, democracy doesn't run on autopilot. It needs maintenance, it needs feedback, and yes, it needs dialogue. Constructive, courageous, sometimes messy dialogue. When we come back to the table, as we're doing now, we aren't just renewing a dialogue. We are restoring trust, rekindling accountability, and reaffirming the idea that people must always be at the center of power. This week, we'll explore what that renewed relationship should look like. Can legislatures truly be people's parliaments without the voices of the people's organizations? Can civil society organizations be effective if it's always outside the room and never at the table? We can expect rich discussions, sharp insights, and yes, even some uncomfortable truths, but also expect laughter, learning, and the magic that happens when people who care deeply about democracy come together with open minds and shared purpose. That's why this week matters. It's a space to rebuild, reconnect, and reimagine the dialogue between legislatures and civil society, not as parallel processes, but as partners in progress. Because when parliaments close their doors to public voices, they risk becoming echo chambers. And when civil society gives up on legislative engagement, we all lose the chance to turn activism into action. I'd like to thank our partners, CHR, APMON, Mzalendo, and many others in the background for making this possible. Thank you very much. And with those few words, I'd like to welcome you to the conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Rashad. Last but not least, I'm going to welcome our matron, Ms. Caroline, who really is the captain of this boat. Other people pretend that they are leading this boat, but we know who holds the power behind the throne. Madam Caroline.
I'm not sure who those pretenders to the throne are, but whoever you are, be warned. Good morning. Sani Bonani. Allow me to stand on the established protocols and take this opportunity to thank you all for joining us. As Bonolo was giving her opening remarks, I wondered who had given her my speech, because then she has said everything and so has Rashad. And so my comments are going to be very brief, and it's to really just thank you, and the team for having us here. It's so amazing to be able to meet in South Africa after what began as a dream, as an aspiration, and to see how far we have come. So on behalf of the African Parliamentary Monitoring Organizations, and Sami has spoken about this, it is my honor and pleasure to welcome you to the 5th Parliamentary Engagement and Monitoring Organizations Conference. We are proud that being in the West, having been in the West and the East, we now have the pleasure of gathering in the South of our continent. It's a culmination of a journey that began in Accra and now finds maturity in Pretoria. And the numbers that are present in this room actually attest to that maturity. It's also my pleasure to wish you a belated International Day of Democracy. And we note that this year's theme, Renewed Global Commitment to Democratic Values, is really poetic, in the fact that it resonates with the theme of our conference, which is getting back on track, renewing dialogue between legislatures and civil society. As we gather here today, we can attest to the fact that there's a global call for our institutions, especially Parliament, to be firmly grounded in values of democracy that is open, responsive, accountable, inclusive, and transparent. We have noticed as recent as last week that uprisings from citizens in Africa and beyond. We all know what happened to Nepal last week. We've seen it in Indonesia and also in my own country, Kenya. And these pertinent concerns regarding the growing mistrust between citizens and their representatives. And this rift keeps widening by the day. Data by the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace Global Protest Tracker indicates that over 159 significant anti-government protests have erupted worldwide in the last 12 months. And of this, since January last year, 24 have been in African countries. At the center of this is our parliaments, which have borne the brunt of the blame, as evidenced last week in Nepal and Indonesia before that. It's evident, therefore, that there's a trust deficit between citizens and their legislatures, and it needs to be addressed. And so as we meet here today, I hope that this dialogue will give us solutions that we can employ to bridge this mistrust and this gap. In this week also, it is very important for us to note that PMOs, many of who are here today, their role they play cannot be understated. They provide a critical link between the complexities of a parliamentary jargon and procedures and the needs of the citizens. By breaking down the three roles of members of parliament, we are providing awareness, pushing for grassroots accountability, and allowing open dialogue between the two. Bonolo has spoken about the dialogue they had last week with the former president, and coincidentally, the Mzalendo team also spent time in the field engaging leaders with young people. And if I were to sit with Bonolo and compare the notes that came from her dialogue session, I'm sure the issues would be very sure that the things that we say are well received and acted upon. I'm almost finishing. So as the world evolves with new and emerging technologies and innovations, we must rethink our approaches to the parliamentary and civic engagement space. And that doesn't just go for parliament, it's also for us as civil society organizations to think how we are sharing, communicating, and breaking down information for the people so that there's understanding. It is also worth noting that as leaders worryingly lean more to authoritarian leadership, the civic space is increasingly becoming threatened. This courtesy of enactment of laws that threaten basic rights and freedoms, or the shrinking funding that threatens the important role of civil society. As parliamentary monitoring organizations, we must be at the forefront of ensuring that we are actually unpacking bills that are before our own parliaments to make sure that they are responsive and not punitive to the citizens. So this week, as we gather here in Pretoria, we'll be asking ourselves how parliaments and the civil society can work together to enhance our democracies. We'll be looking at collaborative opportunities between state and non-state actors that create an opportunity for innovation, deeper grassroots engagement, and enhanced accountability mechanisms that are steered by. And I think Maria from Argentina, who served, and we'll give her a clap. But allow me to say this: Maria, in addition to the roles that she holds at Directorio Legislativo, she also served as a civil society lead of the Open Government Partnership between 2020 and 2022. And during her tenure, she championed for open parliaments. And courtesy of that, open parliaments has been adopted as a global network of parliaments, as global work within OGP, and collectively and separately, parliaments are advancing open parliaments within the network. And given that she's traveled the farthest, 18 hours to get here, could we please give her a clap? Maria, maybe you may stand for those that might not know you, and just so that they get to meet you. And if you want to know how the Latin American network is doing this, she's the right person to speak to. Thank you so much for your support. As we gather here this morning, I'm proud to say that our journey has led to the development of an Open Parliament Index, a comparative tool that assesses the level of transparency and accountability. First launched in 2022, focusing on West African national parliaments. This year, we have expanded the scope to the 33 African states. I think that deserves a clap. From a dream, from a conversation to 33 African parliaments willing to subject themselves to some sense of assessment, some sense of civic engagement and peer learning, that's great progress. I invite each one of you to interact with the findings later in the evening and to help us identify urgent areas of intervention and in the long term and the short term. Last but not least, I take this opportunity to thank each one of you for honoring our invitation and welcome you to a space for candid conversations. Once again, and on behalf of APMON, I welcome you to this conference and wish you all a fruitful discussion. Thank you and God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I take it you are now comfortable. I can see your shoes are still on, but which is good. So I'm pleased to see that Zible, you are smiling a lot more. You know, we love it. I'm going to invite a good friend of mine. I have claimed her, and I say this in the presence of my boss, that the Center for Human Rights likes to claim her as their friend, but in fact, she's my friend. Uh, um, Minister Yvonne, former Minister Yvonne, studied here at the Center for Human Rights. So she's actually part of what the center calls the Pretoria Mafias. As an outsider who didn't study here at the Center for Human Rights, I still don't know this Pretoria Mafia story because it sounds very scary and dangerous. So maybe former minister can start by contextualizing for us what this Pretoria Mafia is, because I know that these mafias are everywhere. They are in the African Union, they're in the United, these mafias are everywhere. They're taking over the world. And so I want to appreciate you, Yvonne, for really always, heeding our call when we call upon you. As I mentioned, she's a former Minister of Justice from Namibia. In fact, Yvonne used to be in academia, and she left academia when she was appointed as the chairperson of the Law Reform and Development Commission in Namibia in 2015, and subsequently got appointed as a Minister of Justice. We have asked Yvonne to really reflect on our collective responsibility in times of unparalleled crisis. And I think one of the things that are important to note here is that in global relations, Africa has long been stigmatized as a continent at war with itself. And I mentioned this earlier that we are really currently confronted with unprecedented challenges, and the landscape on this continent is becoming increasingly complex and fragile. But what I also don't want us to do is to sit here and lament. In my other life, I used to be a preacher. I've lived so many lives. In my other life, I used to be a preacher, and every time I used to read the writing of King David, where he will lament, "Oh, my soul is downcast," and scream and be dramatic. He was quite a drama queen. But while he does that, he will then lend the text with a sense of hope, right? To say, now my hope is in the Lord, and I know that, as I walk through the valley of shadow of death, the Lord is with me, something like that. And I'm hoping that as we collectively sit together to really engage about these challenges that we are facing on the continent, we don't fall in the trap of analysis paralysis. We must land at a place of hope. And it's very difficult to do that when we are confronted with what we are confronted in. And I remember last year when the protest in Kenya erupted, a varsity friend of mine who is Kenyan said to me, "My heart is very sore, and I'm grieving over the lives of young people young people that have lost their lives at the hand of the violence of the police in Kenya." And then she said to me, "But Dad, I'm also very hopeful. I'm very hopeful because I think here in this country, we are doing something extraordinary for this continent." And I think this is where, as we think about our collective responsibility in these very difficult times on the continent, as former Minister Yvonne will help us reflect on that, I also want us to land on Thursday at a place of hope. The fact that we are actually here and 29 countries on this continent are represented in this room, that on its own says a lot. And so I'm going to welcome a dear friend of the Center for Human Rights, former Minister of Justice at Namibia, Minister Yvonne Dausap, to come give her a keynote address. Minister.
Firstly, as part of the mafia, I can't reveal our strategies and approaches, so I will not say anything more about that. But the other thing that you should have said is I'm probably the oldest mafia in the room, unless there's someone from the year 2000 in the room. Is there someone from the year 2000? Because I'm from 2001, and that's always been the benefit that I've had for the longest time, to be the elder in the room. So good morning, everyone.
Imagine waking up to a newspaper headline, Parliament in chaos and a national embarrassment. Who of us remember the many scenes in the past 10 years of members of parliament fighting, hitting each other with chairs, shouting and calling each other names, denigrating this platform, which ought to be the pride of the nation, to basically a rally ground instead of a battleground of ideas? Many of you will agree that these scenes appear to have become commonplace in many or some of our jurisdictions. Parliaments, by their very nature and existence, are anchors of the hopes of the people. It is the one platform where typically the collective voice of the people is assembled indiscriminately, even only theoretically. National, sub-regional, and transnational parliaments find their duty to speak for and represent the interest of the people in either national constitutions, enabling statutes, and supranational treaties, which would also normally provide for their privileges and immunities. It appears we have misconstrued the foundation of what that privilege looks like, at least in some instances, because I'm sure there are jurisdictions, particularly in Africa, that seem to take this normative privilege seriously. Don't ask me for examples, though. I'm sure the Open Parliament Index will reveal this for us as that important tool continues to take lessons and evolve over the next few years. Honorable members, distinguished guests, representatives of the civil society network, the voices of the people present here, good morning. In my presentation this morning, I conclude with Vincent Harding's characterization of what Walter Rodney envisioned for Africa's development agenda going forward, by encouraging all of us, and I quote, to move toward a radically transformed vision of ourselves and of our capacities for changing our lives and our objective conditions. Quietly, insistently, he urged us to claim our full responsibility for engaging in the struggle for a new world order. I come back to this point later in my remarks. But back to the importance of privileges and immunities in a parliamentary context. It is sacred, but only if used properly and for the real benefit of the people. Not what we think the people need or superficial grandstanding as political opponents. Instead, it is important because it provides much needed protection for members of parliament to speak without fear or favor. In the state organ paradigm, two state organs enjoy this privilege. The organ called the legislature and the judiciary act without fear or favor, and this helps with acting in the interest of the people without thinking about potential backlash and its impact on the work of parliament or the judiciary, because it can justify their actions, at least in theory, without thinking about repercussions, especially if done in good faith and because of the important watchdog and oversight roles they play. It is an incredible honor to be here. I was also honored to have been the keynote at the opening of the civil society platform of the Pan-African Parliament, where the conversations of citizens taking responsibility for holding African leaders accountable took root, and how the Pan-African Parliament is a vessel for this purpose. These remarks are a footnote to what I said then. Distinguished guests, monitoring and evaluating the work we do, why we do it, and how we do it is often seen as a norm for programmatic work, such as the work that this network does. I'm impressed that the review and conversations are happening in the manner conceptualized by the network, and I hope your work will continue to make sense in the broader political economy discussions. I have been asked to speak to a sub-theme titled, Our Responsibilities in Times of Unparalleled Crisis. I thought to myself, who are we talking about here and what makes crisis unparalleled? The answer lies in the manner the entire program is framed and the design of the approach and what the expected key outcomes are going to be. This made my task slightly easier because key elements of my reflections are broken up in individual topics which experts and resource persons that I believe have much deeper understanding and knowledge of the subject matter. I've seen and I've listened from the greetings this morning that many of you in this room are doctors. I'm almost unsure about what I'm saying, whether or not it will be put apart. But that's the nature of academia. As it is with any keynote address, my reflections will be high level and maybe even slightly all over the place, hopefully for good reason. What I've been asked to address is layered because I was thinking, what makes unparalleled crisis in the time we find ourselves? In fact, I thought, are the issues perhaps bigger in scope and scale? But are these not questions Walter Rodney in how Europe underdeveloped Africa grappled with and left us with responsibilities to overcome our historical odyssey and take on the task of redeveloping ourselves, our people, our nations, and the world? I was asking myself, what makes the challenges of climate change, conflicts on the continent and elsewhere, the rape and killing of our women and girls, the continually chattered but not resolved issues of persons with disabilities, the hunger, poverty that many of our people continue to face, massive scale of corruption, and the issues of redefining human rights to protect some and exclude others. The rising tribal tensions in many of our national body politic, racial tensions, apartheid, and discrimination as unparalleled. I have not even listed the issues affecting the world more generally. Impunity, reparations, genocide, the multilateral crisis in Africa's agenda of inclusion, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and the existential crisis of climate dangers, the impact of extractive industries on human development, the place of business and human rights from the perspective of the role of corporations in human rights violations. I have served the 6th and the 7th parliaments in Namibia, albeit in two different capacities. First, as the chairperson, former chairperson of the Law Reform and Development Commission, I had the primary responsibility to ensure public participation in the lawmaking process. Second, as a minister or former minister of justice, it seems like I'm still reeling from not being reappointed, but that's the nature of politics. And a member of parliament, I took it upon myself from time to time to remind ourselves that we were there under the auspices of a constitutional imperative. And I'm only sharing this as a sample. The Namibian constitution has three key elements that I want to share with you. First, that we were representatives of all the people, not some, and that in our duties we were guided by the objectives of the Namibian constitution, which are the aspirations of life, liberty, justice, human dignity, and the pursuit of happiness. And number two, that we will be guided by the public interest. And this has always been a matter of much debate and interest, although morality, national security feature prominently in what that looks like. But more generally, it seems to suggest that it relates to issues affecting the people at any given time. And three, that one must follow your conscience. This also in a party list system where MPs are proportionally represented, where MPs are expected to toe the party line, becomes tricky. Because you may be recalled, but that's a discussion for plenary and perhaps under the various topics prepared for the remainder of the conference. Now, Namibia has a bicameral system. And I've gleaned from the OPI report that many more jurisdictions in Africa have this system, although the two houses go by different names. In Namibia, it's the National Assembly and the National Council. I know also they go by the names of House of Representatives and Senate, for instance. I'm only using the Namibian example to illustrate where responsibility starts. Although I did not look at it, I'm sure Namibia's approach to parliamentary decorum is not unique. Frans Fanon in Wretched of the Earth made an interesting observation about involving the people. And he says, as leaders, and here leadership is not confined to political leadership, we call on them to, and I quote, fight against poverty, to fight against colonialism, to fight against underdevelopment. Thus, let us gird up our loins and set to work. End of quote. His proposition then was, and I agree with him, that it is neither reasonable nor correct to place that kind of burden on the people. My understanding is that to place these responsibilities on the people has a design flaw because it creates a battlefield culture, pardon me, that both Fanon and Walters seem to bemoan. We are constantly asking the people to stand up against this, that, or the other. And I've said it before, that there is a role citizens must play. They cannot go to sleep after elections. But what must that look like? And what should the extent of that role be? I know many of you here are eager to hear the message from a former minister, but the truth is what I will be saying is already known to many of you sitting in this room. In fact, the conceptual work for this platform has already provided some of the answers. If I was digitally savvy, I would have prompted ChatGPT and they would have written this entire speech for me. But I knew as an African leader, this theme is deeper than semantics. In fact, it is a question that even multiple conversations cannot fix, unless we return to Walter Rodney's vision for Africa. This is bigger than an agenda packed with great ideas of what we should be doing next. This is bigger than the Africa we want in Agenda 2063. This is about ethical leadership and sincere service to the people of our nations and the continent. This is recognizing that as long as Western Sahara remains under bondage and the conflict in Sudan and the DRC rages on, or peace settlements are made outside the African Union framework, making a mockery of the African solutions for African problems. And as long as our leaders do not have the same collective consciousness as they did in 1963 for collective freedom and socioeconomic development, and as long as we don't understand the pedagogy of the oppressed, as enunciated by Paulo Freire, these conversations, important as they are, will remain conversations with some impact, no doubt, but we will keep coming back to it to remain on track because the collective conscience still suffers from mental slavery. Imagine we sing along, even dance to Bob Marley's redemption song since 1980. How much of it have we internalized, both individually and as a collective? I remember how angry we were with the late Dr. Chika Onye Ani when he authored The Capitalist Nigger, The Road to Success, with a follow-up in The Roar of the African Lion, because he was telling uncomfortable truths. He was washing our proverbial dirty linen in public by saying, no one owes us anything. We are the authors of our own destiny, and the narratives we create must be our own, not comparative reflections of what others have achieved and that we now want to do the same. So back to open parliaments. Yes, we must have them. And we must rearrange and talk about open parliaments and have indices to track best practices and lessons learned from lived experiences. But we have another reality. These difficult conversations, when had honestly, often had people killed. It did Thomas Sankara. It did Walter Rodney. It did Patrice Lumumba. It did Tulani Maseko. It did Ken Sarawiwa. And we see the continued killing of young people who stand up against inequities and rising tide of particularly youth unemployment. I'm not raising this to instill fear, but it tells me we have a long way to go still. The system collective is not ready for a revolution that places the people at the center of our dealings. If we did, we would not have a conference theme that centers on how to renew and articulate an increase of the voice of the people in the manner in which parliaments conduct their business. For instance, while governments rightly focus on the young people and the elderly, people in the age bracket of 35 to 59 are asking, what about us? Are we not hungry? Don't we have jobs? Don't we need jobs? And are we not affected by the various crises the world, more generally in Africa in particular, is facing? So it is easy to talk about transparency in the way political parties, regardless of political aisle or spectrum, consult and represent the views and interests first of the people who voted for them, and second, the national interest, and thirdly, how their work is shared. Responsibility and accountability also stems from those dimensions. Whereas there's the element of resistance, such as methods of either violence and or corruption to dampen public outcry, sometimes willingly or unknowingly, even grassroots members of society may find themselves complicit. And this is the issue of co-option or complicity. And therefore the issue, pardon me, and therefore the issue of co-option and complicity is an element that needs attention, because it can become a threat to the work of the network to find authentic solutions to the problems that we have. There is no doubt, and Achebe, in a message in Pius Adesami's You Are Not a Country, Africa, said, and I quote, Africa is a huge continent with a diversity of cultures and languages. Africa is not simple. Often people want to simplify it, generalize it, stereotype its people, but Africa is very complex. In fact, the Open Parliament Index maiden report of 2022 makes a similar point as part of its assessment of countries. Taking cue from this, the answer we continuously seek may not be simple and will not be one size fits all. While model answers provide much needed information and traction in getting some low-hanging fruit activities going, the complexities of each country and its people, their cultures, their disposition within the African Union setup, how their leaders are viewed, are they seen as strong states, thus driving a dominant narrative and whose views matter, or are their leaders seen as weak, thus easily manipulated into agreeing to positions that may not be in the interest of the people they serve? It is about how communities, civil society, and traditional leaders interact with the local leadership that will ultimately determine how successful their journey for active citizens and open parliaments will be. The network may have to consider how to assist those that may not be in a position or those that would be otherwise be considered vulnerable. Because in the end, they are all our people, the African people. I take this moment to congratulate Parliamentary Network Africa and the Africa Parliamentary Monitoring Organization Network, APMON, that have developed the legislative transparency tool, the Open Parliament Index, and the 13 West African countries that participated in the maiden release of the West African edition. I liked the availability of the data and the open source approach of the report, which could be used as a tool to enhance and encourage self-study and review. And this could be a method to enhance open parliaments and active civic participation. As I conclude, we need to continue our reflections on the concept of an open parliament as, and I quote, one that is transparent and accountable to the people that it is set up to serve and encourage citizens' participation in its work, end of quote. The dimensions of transparency, civic participation, and public accountability are apt to respond to this aspiration. The aspiration that truly legislative representatives must not only assure that the Africa we want is attained, but the narrative that are used are authentically African. There is a need for new concepts, new kinds of law. Access to information laws are just one part. There is so much more. And other legal, political, and strategic instruments to, as Wolfgang Kalek in Law versus Power said, force new paths. What more are we offering our people? What we need to remember is to try, when we look back, what do we see? And what patterns were there and are developing. I suggest, as part of the journey forward, that we consider integrating or at least borrow from Sumelo Biko's work in Africa Reimagined, reclaiming a sense of abundance and prosperity. He espouses on some of the more uncomfortable but relevant issues, particularly in his chapter on modern African institutions and his emphasis on our failure as African societies to ensure that our cultures remain our supreme reference points for governing Africa's political economy as just one aspect of many important points he raises. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Yvonne. That was quite profound. I think one of the things that this keynote addressed, and it's something that I'm particularly obsessed about, is the idea of citizens' engagement and the idea of citizens and African leaders talking to each other. I always talk about the strange relationship that somehow, citizens have with governments and African leaders. As I mentioned earlier, that in my other life I used to be a preacher, and I studied theology. So there's a concept and a theory in theology that they call the humanetics of suspicion. And what the humanetics of suspicion essentially talk about is this idea of approaching everything and interpreting and analyzing everything that you do with suspicion. And we see that. We see that in ways in which African leaders engage with us citizens from that point of suspicion. And I wonder if at all, there would be that recognition that we cannot talk about democratization and the protection of human rights in Africa and democratic consolidation outside of citizens. And if our leaders and our governments, even the African Union, I dare to say, were to really see this far beyond what the Constitutive Act of the African Union say, because the Constitutive Act speaks about the fact that to see regional integration, it recognizes the role of civil society. And I wonder if this move away from legal frameworks, from constitutive acts, and really strengthen this relationship between citizens and African leaders, I think we'll see something extraordinary. And I say this because part of the work that we do with the Pan-African Parliament Civil Society Forum and the unit that I manage is that to do that with the Pan-African Parliament. And I see some of our colleagues from the Parliament joined as the director of the Bureau and the head of communication at the Parliament. And I think, if anything, we must also appreciate the fact that the Pan-African Parliament is intentional about opening doors to engaging with citizens. And so some of the things that Minister highlighted, it's really that if citizens and African leaders would work together, we may just see an Africa that looks different than our current reality. It is Karl Marx who said, philosophers have interpreted the world in various ways, but the task is to change the world. And we can sit here and interpret the world in various ways and play these intellectual gymnastic games that we do, and we do quite well. But I think the task here is to change the world. And I want to believe that each of us in this room, we take in this task very seriously. And so thank you so much, Yvonne. We appreciate Yvonne again. We are going to take a little break. We do need to take a picture. Somebody gave us money, and we must show them we used their money. Please turn the cameras off. So I think we should take the picture first. Stephen Combs, guys, can you guide me? We're taking it here, right? So we're going to take a picture, and then after we take the picture, you can go have coffee. and hug each other and gossip about Africa or whatever you do when you have coffee. And then when we come back, the president of the Pan African Parliament will join us. He will make a few remarks. And again, in the spirit of having a dialogue, we have asked the president that he doesn't talk at us, but talks with us. Is that right, English? Yeah, that I went to school in the villages. Please, I was taught Setswana, English in Setswana. Forgive me, but the point is that we want to engage with the president, and so please do have your questions ready. He's going to make a few remarks for 10 to 15 minutes, and we're going to open up space for dialogue. And again, that's the point here, that we are grateful when African leaders are really open to wanting to engage with us. So let's take a picture and go have coffee. Thank you. Welcome back.
So you find a way to keep how the question more comfortable so that once you have to even look up for anything you have. You get what it's like.
Thank you so much and welcome back. There's an echo. As I mentioned earlier, that the Center for Human Rights and the Pan-African Parliament Civil Society Forum has been working with the Pan-African Parliament, in fact, for the past 7 years now. I still remember very well in 2018, August, on the sidelines of the committee sessions, we hosted a very small civil society forum. There was about 20 of us. It looked like we didn't know what we were doing. But we were convinced about this dream that we have, the dream of ensuring that civil society organizations are part of the workings of the Pan-African Parliament. And so the Civil Society Forum, essentially what it does is to, one, work towards increasing the visibility of the Pan-African Parliament and raising awareness about who and what the Parliament is about, but also to create platforms for citizens to engage with the Parliament. And we've worked with various committees of the Parliament. We've worked with the Office of the Legal Counsel and the Office of the Clerk. And I must note that one of the greatest milestone for us was in 2023, when we hosted the first parliamentary dialogue. Since the inception of the Pan-African Parliament, we hosted the first parliamentary dialogue between civil society and members of the parliament. And I think that was quite significant, and building on to some of the things that Minister Yvonne mentioned earlier about this idea of dialogue and citizens and African leaders hearing each other. And so for this particular session, it's a session that will specifically look at the PAP. It's broken into two segments. For this session, we are going to have a conversation with the President of the Pan-African Parliament. And then after that conversation with the president, we will take a picture with the president, and then we will then move on to another conversation that is also related to the Pan-African Parliament. And the idea here is to really, think through this idea of the importance of regional parliaments in terms of, protection of human rights, promotion of democratization, and what role can regional parliaments play. And so this will be a co-facilitated session. As I mentioned earlier, that there's someone from Ghana who thinks that he owns the power behind the throne, but we let him be. And so I'm going to hand over to him so that he can feel special, because it's very important for him that he feels special. And so I'm going to invite my colleague Kwame, who will officially welcome the president of the Pan-African Parliament and open up space for dialogue. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bonolo. And this is certainly one of the highlights of our week here in Pretoria on this engagement. Because while we're thinking about the programming for this 1 week engagement, we thought, what would it be like to have civil society organizations that works with parliaments in 29 countries on our continent come to Pretoria, which is just a stone throw from where our continental parliament is based, and not have an opportunity to directly engage with your parliament, my parliament, our parliament, the Pan-African Parliament. And that was when we reached out to the Pan-African